The year was 1879, and the sun baked the plains of New Mexico territory until the very earth seemed to shimmer with heat and silence. The small frontier town of Dry Creek was alive that morning, with the clamor of an auction. Voices rising, horses neighing, boots grinding into the dust. Men with tobacco-stained beards shouted bids over the heads of their neighbors, while women, wrapped in faded calico, clutched small children and prayed their husbands didn't gamble away the last of what they had. Among that noise and motion stood Clara Whitmore, a woman of 60 years, once known for her beauty and her husband's sprawling horse ranch north of town. The years had not stolen her dignity, though they'd surely stolen everything else. Her husband, John Whitmore, had been dead 3 years, taken by fever and buried beneath a cottonwood tree near the creek that once marked the edge of their land. The ranch had failed soon after. The drought burned the grass. The cattle died and the bank took what remained. Now Clara was here, standing beside a corral holding her last 3 mares, ready to auction them to settle the final debt on her husband's name. She had dressed carefully that morning. Gray calico dress mended neat, boots polished, and her long silver hair tied in a bun that defied the wind. There was something unyielding about her, something that made men pause before speaking her name. As the auctioneer called the first bid, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The cause rode in from the far edge of town, 3 Apaches on horseback, their faces unreadable in the sun, their ponies sleek and strong. The lead rider was taller than most, his black hair bound with leather, his shoulders draped in a faded cavalry coat. His name, whispered from man to man, was Taza, known as Half Moon among both his people and the settlers, a man who'd once fought with the Apache bands in the Sierra Madre, then turned peacemaker after too much blood had soaked the ground. Taza dismounted without a word, his dark eyes scanning the auction yard. The settlers watched warily. No one trusted an Apache, even one rumored to be tamed. But Taza didn't seem to notice their fear. He moved with quiet authority as though the earth itself made room for him. Clara felt the air change when he walked past. She kept her chin high, trying to ignore the heat that flushed her cheeks. The auctioneer barked the next bid and the horses went for half what they were worth. One by one, her life's work was led away. When it was over, she turned toward the small wooden table at the edge of the corral, where she'd pinned a single sheet of paper, handwritten in careful script, housekeeper wanted. Meals and shelter offered. Will work for fair wage. She had no money left, no home now that the ranch was gone. All she hoped for was a roof, a bed, and work to keep her hands from trembling. That was when she heard the voice. Low, steady, rich as the rumble of thunder before rain. I want the 60-year-old woman. For a moment the world stopped. The laughter that followed was cruel and instant. What did he say? One rancher snorted. The Apache wants the widow. Another shouted, slapping his knee. Even the auctioneer froze, his face pale. Clara turned slowly. Taza stood beside her stall, his expression calm, unreadable. There was no hint of mockery in his eyes. What did you say? She asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound steady. He took a step closer. You seek work, he said. My camp needs hands. I offer food, horse, shelter, and silver coin for labor done honest. The laughter swelled again, but this time Clara heard something different beneath it, an anger rising in her chest. These men who'd taken her land, who'd turned away when she needed help, were now laughing at the only man who'd offered her honest terms. She looked him in the eye. And why, she asked softly, would you want an old woman to work your camp? Taza tilted his head, his gaze unflinching. Because the young ones do not last. The old ones know how to stay. The crowd went silent. No one dared speak. Even the wind seemed to pause between the posts and wagons. In that stillness, Clara felt something stir, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't desire, not yet, but recognition, a flicker of understanding between 2 people who'd both buried too much of themselves in the dust. The auctioneer cleared his throat awkwardly. Now, mister, you can't just... Taza reached into his saddlebag and dropped a small pouch onto the table. The sound of silver coins rang through the air. Payment for her work 1 month in advance. A hush spread through the yard. No one had ever seen an Apache handle silver so freely, nor treat a white woman with that kind of respect. Clara stood rooted in place, her heart pounding. She had nowhere to go. The boarding house wouldn't take her again. The bank clerk had offered her a broom in exchange for humiliation. Here stood a man, an Apache no less, offering fair trade and dignity. You'd take me to your people? she asked. He nodded once. You will work, cook, tend horses, be safe. No harm comes to one who shares my fire. Something about the way he said it, no harm comes to one who shares my fire, made the hairs on her arms rise. There was an old power in that promise, one the frontier world had forgotten. She looked toward the hills beyond town, where red mesas burned in the sun, and she realized she was tired of fear, tired of the whispering women and the pitying glances. Perhaps it was madness or maybe just courage left over from a younger life. Either way, she lifted her chin. I'll go, she said. The murmurs turned to disbelief. You can't mean that, Clara. Someone shouted. She's gone crazy, another muttered, but she didn't look back. Taza gave a short nod and turned toward his horse. She followed him through the crowd, feeling their stares burning her back. Each step felt like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. When they reached the edge of town, he handed her a horse, tall, chestnut, gentle-eyed. She mounted awkwardly, her old joints protesting. You ride well? He asked. I used to, she said, managing a small smile. Then you will again. They rode into the rising wind, the town shrinking behind them until it was nothing but a smudge of dust against the sky. Ahead stretched the vast open country, endless, dangerous, and free. As they climbed into the high mesas, the last sound of the town faded away, and only the whisper of the desert remained. Clara glanced at him once, his profile carved sharp against the setting sun, and thought how strange fate was, to lose everything and still find herself riding beside a man who didn't laugh at her, didn't pity her, but spoke as though her worth was still whole. The journey was long, and the silence between them thick with things unspoken. But in that silence something new began, a fragile, wordless bond between two survivors of very different worlds. When they reached his camp, a small clearing beside a clear stream, the scent of juniper in the air, he dismounted and said simply, You will rest. Tomorrow we work, she nodded, though her heart beat fast and uncertain. As she sat by his fire that night, the stars burning bright above, she realized she had crossed not just miles of land, but the invisible border between who she had been and who she was becoming. The town would whisper, the world would judge, but none of that mattered anymore. For the first time since her husband's death, Clara Whitmore felt alive. The first night in Taza's camp was a quiet one, lit by the slow, steady flicker of a small fire. The stars stretched above them like rivers of silver dust, flowing endlessly across the New Mexico sky. Clara had always thought she knew silence, those long nights after her husband's death when the wind whistled through the broken windows of her empty ranch house. But this was a different kind of silence, not the silence of loss, but of vastness, of life holding its breath. Taza moved with purpose, every motion deliberate. He handed her a blanket of woven wool, heavy and warm. You will sleep there, he said, pointing to a bed of soft grass under the shelter of a rock ledge. And you? She asked. He nodded toward the other side of the fire. I will watch the horses. Coyotes come at night. He said it with such simplicity that she didn't question it further. The fire cracked softly. Beyond it, the shadows moved. His people, 3 others, silent and graceful. They acknowledged her only with brief nods, their expressions unreadable. Clara lay awake long after the others slept, listening to the sounds of the wild. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of brush, and once the quiet hum of a song. Taza's low voice singing something ancient and soft in Apache, his words carried on the night air like a prayer. She didn't understand the meaning, but she understood the feeling. It was the kind of song a man sings when his soul remembers something his body has nearly forgotten. Peace. The morning came cool and pink, sunlight spilling across the mesa. Clara rose early, the way she always had, and began to tidy the camp. She fetched water, cleaned the cooking pots, even brushed the horses before anyone else stirred. The movements came naturally, almost comforting. When Taza returned from scouting the ridge, he paused at the sight of her standing there, sleeves rolled up, hands steady on a brush as she worked the mane of a young bay mare. You rise before the sun, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. Old habits die hard, she replied, not looking up. My husband used to say there's no sense waiting for daylight when there's work to be done. Taza tilted his head slightly. He was wise, he was steady. She stopped brushing and stared off into the distance. We had 40 years together. Built everything with our hands. Lost it the same way. He didn't offer pity, and for that she was grateful. He only nodded once, then said, "The land takes what it wants. It leaves the rest to see what we will do next." It was an odd kind of comfort, one that didn't try to heal her pain but honored it instead. Days passed, and routine settled in. Clara learned the rhythm of his camp, the care of horses, the preparation of food, the quiet respect his people shared with one another. There were no shouts, no wasted words, no idle cruelty. In their silence there was a deep dignity she hadn't seen among the settlers. Sometimes Taza rode out for a day or two, leaving her with the others. She would spend the evenings mending or walking along the stream that wound through the canyon. She found herself watching the way the light hit the red rock walls, the way the wind carried the scent of cedar and smoke. One evening, he returned with supplies, flour, salt, and a small sack of coffee beans. She looked at him with surprise. "You traded for these?" "Yes, at the mission." Her brows lifted. "And they didn't give you trouble?" "They know me now," he said quietly. "They know I trade fair." That night, as she poured him a cup of coffee, she asked, "Why did you offer me work, Taza?" "Truly." He looked at her across the fire, eyes dark and thoughtful. "My mother was white," he said at last, "taken from the settlers when she was young. But she learned our ways. She stayed. She told me once, 'A heart is not a color and a soul is not a nation.'" Clara listened, hands still on her lap. "She taught me to respect strength," he went on. "Not the kind that fights, but the kind that endures. When I saw you at the auction, I saw that same strength. The others saw an old woman. I saw someone still standing when all else has fallen." The words struck her deep. She didn't know what to say, so she only nodded, blinking back the tears that had gathered uninvited. He continued quietly, "You are not weak, Clara Whitmore. You are only tired of being surrounded by those who are." For the first time in years, she smiled without sadness. In the days that followed, their bond deepened, not through words but through the simple rhythm of shared work. They rode together into the valley to cut wild grass for the horses, gathered wood, and repaired a corral post by post. Once, a sudden summer storm rolled in from the west, fierce and unexpected. Rain came down in sheets, soaking them through as they worked to tie down the tarps. The thunder cracked overhead like a whip. Clara slipped on the slick mud, her ankle twisting beneath her. Taza was beside her in an instant, lifting her easily into his arms. "Careful," he said, voice low. "I'm not made of glass," she muttered, though her breath caught when she felt the heat of him, his heartbeat steady against her shoulder. He carried her into the shelter of the ledge and set her down gently. For a moment neither spoke. The rain beat a wild rhythm outside, but between them, the air was charged with something wordless. When he finally spoke, his tone was softer. "In my people's way, we say that when the storm breaks, it tests what will stand. You—" His gaze met hers. "You do not break." Clara looked away, her heart thundering faster than the rain outside. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. She, a 60-year-old widow, blushing under the gaze of a man half her age, but she couldn't. Because beneath that storm, with the smell of rain and smoke all around, she felt alive in a way that startled her. The next morning, the sun rose clean and gold over the washed land. The world smelled of wet sage and earth. Taza rode out early to check the far fences. Clara sat by the fire, sipping coffee and thinking of all that had changed in so short a time. The town would never understand. They would mock her name in the saloon, whisper that she had gone mad, that the old widow had run off with an Apache. But she didn't care. For years she had lived like a ghost among the living. Now for the first time she felt seen, not pitied, not judged, seen. When Taza returned, he handed her a single white flower, plucked from the canyon trail. "It grows where little else can," he said. She smiled, taking it gently. "Then it's in the right company." He said nothing, only gave a small nod and turned to tend the horses. But the warmth in his eyes lingered long after. And that night, as the stars rose again above their quiet fire, Clara felt something impossible and beautiful take root in her heart. A beginning. The weeks turned into months, and the red mesas of Taza's land became Clara's new home. By early autumn, the air turned sharp and dry, the kind that whispered of coming cold. Together they worked to fortify the small ranch, mending fences, gathering hay, and storing corn in woven baskets. Each dawn began with quiet labor and ended in soft conversation by the fire. The unspoken tension between them grew with the certainty of the seasons, slow, steady, and undeniable. She never called it love. Perhaps she didn't know how to name it. But every glance, every shared silence carried the weight of something sacred. Still, out beyond those mesas, the world had not forgotten Clara Whitmore, or forgiven her. In the town of Dry Creek, gossip spread like smoke from a brush fire. The saloon girls whispered at first, then the shopkeepers, then the men who once courted her pity. The widows living with an Apache, one would say, leaning across a whiskey glass. She's bewitched, another spat. No, she shamed herself. Her husband's bones ain't even dust and she's with a savage. Each retelling made the story crueler, louder, uglier. By the time it reached the sheriff's ears, it was something else entirely. The Apache took her by force. Sheriff Eli Graves had always fancied himself a man of justice, though what he really prized was control. Years ago, he'd made Clara an offer after her husband's death: marriage, protection, and the promise of her land's return. She had turned him down with quiet dignity. His pride never forgave it. Now, when word came of her living with the Apache, that old pride curdled into something darker. She's a citizen, he declared at the saloon. If he's holding her, it's against the law. And if she went willingly, asked one of the men. Graves's eyes hardened. Then she ain't in her right mind. Either way, I'll bring her back. And so, one cold morning, he saddled up a posse of 5 men and rode out toward the mesas, carrying not justice, but jealousy and resentment in his heart. Clara was chopping wood when she heard the first echo of hooves across the ridge. She looked up and saw dust rising on the horizon. 6 riders, moving fast. Taza stepped out of the stable, his hand already resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. Trouble? She asked. He nodded once. Townmen. When they arrived, the sheriff rode in front, his face flushed with self-righteous fury. Mrs. Whitmore, he shouted. Step away from that man. Clara straightened her back and met his gaze. Sheriff Graves, you've no authority here. You're a white woman among savages, he barked. You think you can live out here under their laws? You belong in town. Taza stood silent, watching. The sun glinted off the barrel of his rifle. I came of my own will, Clara said evenly. No one forced me. The men behind the sheriff exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't expected defiance. Graves sneered. You call this freedom? Living like an Indian woman? You've lost your wits. That struck a nerve, but she didn't let it show. No, Sheriff, I lost everything else and found my wits here. He turned his horse toward Taza, spitting in the dust. You best send her back, Apache. You can't keep what doesn't belong to you. Taza's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of iron. She belongs to no man, not you, not me. Go. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Graves' hand twitched toward his gun. Before the metal even cleared the holster, Taza raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to make his meaning clear. The sheriff froze, fury in his eyes. You'll regret this. We already have, Taza said quietly. Graves turned his horse with a snarl. Come on, boys. Let's leave the savages to their dirt. As they rode away, Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Taza. They'll be back. Yes, he said simply. Men like that always come back. The days that followed were uneasy. The wind carried tension like the hum of a taut string. Even the horses seemed restless, their eyes wide and wary at night. Then one evening, a faint orange glow appeared on the distant hills, small at first, then spreading fast. The smell of smoke reached the camp within minutes. Fire, Taza said sharply, climbing the ridge. From the crest, Clara saw it too. The distant ranches burning, the horizon alive with flame. Not accident, he said grimly. Raiders, Coyotero band. Clara's blood ran cold. The Coyotero were a wild faction of Apaches who had refused peace, striking at settlers and traders alike. They blamed Taza for his alliance with the whites. They'll come here, she whispered. He nodded. We will be ready. That night became one of smoke, gunfire, and defiance. Taza's camp stood on high ground, defended by rock and instinct. When the first riders came through the ravine, their cries echoed like ghosts. Clara loaded rifles, her hands shaking but sure. She had shot only once in her life, when a coyote had gone after her calves, but fear burned away hesitation. Taza moved through the smoke like a spirit, calm and precise, firing, reloading, calling orders in Apache. His people answered in kind, their silhouettes lit by the fire's red glow. Clara crouched behind a rock, heart hammering, smoke stinging her eyes. She saw one of the raiders rush forward, a torch in hand, and before she even realized what she was doing, she raised the rifle and fired. The man fell, the torch tumbling harmlessly into the dirt. When the chaos cleared, the band was driven off, retreating into the night. But the victory came at a cost. Taza had been hit, just above the ribs. "Sit," she ordered, dragging him toward the firelight. "Now." He winced but obeyed. The wound bled heavily, dark against his skin. She tore strips of cloth, pressed them to the wound, her hands slick with blood. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice trembling. He looked up at her, eyes glazed but still burning with that same quiet strength. "You fight like one of us," he murmured. She choked on a tear. "Don't you die on me, Taza, you hear me?" But he was already slipping, breath ragged. "No, dying," he said faintly. "Not while you still need me to ride at dawn." Then he passed out. Clara sat by his side all night, washing the wound, whispering to him through the long, dark hours. She prayed in English, in silence, and maybe in something older than either. She thought of her husband's death, of all. The thing she couldn't change, and realized she wasn't ready to lose again. When dawn broke, the world was quiet. Smoke rose from the far hills, but the camp still stood. And beside her, Taza breathed, weakly but alive. The first light touched his face, and she brushed a strand of hair from his brow. For the first time, since John's death, she wept, not out of grief but out of gratitude. He stirred, eyes opening slowly. "Still here," he whispered. "Still here," she answered, her voice breaking. Outside, the desert was still and endless. But in that moment, Clara felt the fragile heartbeat of hope. The town would come for them again, and the raiders might return, but none of that mattered. She had stood beside him when the fire came, and he had stayed alive because she refused to let him go. And in the heart of that burned land, something stronger than fear began to grow between them. Something neither time, nor age, nor the judgment of men could break. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the northern ranges with bitter winds and long, merciless nights. Snow gathered thick upon the mesas, cloaking the land in a silence so heavy that even the coyotes stopped their songs. The desert, so fierce and alive in summer, became a pale, ghostly sea. For Clara Whitmore, those first weeks were spent in near solitude. Taza's people had moved to lower ground, leaving only the two of them at the camp to recover from the wounds of autumn. His injury had not healed clean. Fever came and went like tides, stealing his strength. Some days he could rise and tend the horses. Others he lay pale and sweating, caught between dreams and delirium. Clara tended to him with a devotion that surprised even herself. She boiled herbs, changed bandages, and read aloud from the old Bible she carried from her ranch, though her voice trembled when she reached certain verses. Sometimes he would listen, half-conscious, eyes closed, murmuring in Apache words she could not understand. One night, as she sat beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, he spoke in a whisper. "I see my mother." Clara froze. His gaze was distant, fixed beyond the walls of the small cabin. "She stands by the river," he murmured. "She says it's not my time to cross." Clara's throat tightened. She clasped his hand, rough and fever-hot, and whispered, "Then you stay with me, you hear? You stay on this side." He blinked, and for a moment his focus returned to her. "You talk like her," he said softly. "She would scold the spirits for trying to take me." "I'll scold whoever I have to," Clara replied, forcing a shaky smile. He smiled faintly before sleep claimed him again. The days blurred into one another. Snowstorms swept across the mesa, sometimes lasting 2-3 days at a stretch. The cabin creaked beneath the wind. Its single window rhymed with frost. Clara kept the fire burning, gathering wood between storms and rationing the supplies they'd stored through summer. Each morning she'd check the wound, clean, red, healing slowly, and whisper a quiet thank you. She'd begun to think of the fever as an enemy she could fight, and every small victory felt like a battle won. In the quiet, she found herself talking to him more. About the ranch she lost, the husband buried beneath the cottonwood, the child she had miscarried decades ago and never told a soul about. She spoke to him as though he could hear her even when he couldn't. Perhaps he did. One evening, as the sky burned orange behind the snow clouds, she found him awake, watching her. His eyes, though tired, held a kind of light she hadn't seen before. "You have strong spirit," he said quietly. "You fight death with words." She chuckled softly. "At my age, it's about the only weapon I have left." He reached out weakly, his hand brushing hers. "You have more. You have heart. You have faith." Faith. It was a word she hadn't spoken in years. The kind of thing she used to pretend she had, like fine china hidden in a cupboard, there but untouched. Yet somehow this man, this Apache who prayed to spirits older than her Bible, had restored it to her without ever preaching a word. As the weeks passed, Taza began to regain his strength. He moved slower, careful not to reopen the wound, but his eyes were clearer. He spent hours by the fire carving small wooden figures, horses, birds, once even a likeness of her, rough but unmistakable. "You made me too thin," she teased. He grinned. The wood was small. By midwinter, the snows began to ease. The sun broke through more often, melting the icicles that hung like glass knives from the eaves. Life crept back into the world. Tiny rivulets of water, a hawk's cry echoing through the canyons. But the stillness between them had changed. Something deeper stirred there now, fragile but real. One night, as a soft snow drifted outside, Clara found herself sitting closer to him than usual. The fire painted gold across his skin, his scar catching the light. "Taza," she said quietly, "when you first spoke to me at that auction, did you know what people would think?" He met her eyes steadily. "Yes. And you didn't care?" He shook his head. "A man listens to the truth inside him, not the noise outside." She nodded slowly. "The noise outside can be cruel." He studied her face. "You still hear it?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "In my head I still hear the laughter, the gossip." "Then listen to something else." He leaned forward, gently pressing his hand to her chest, over her heart. "Listen here." "What does it say?" Her breath caught. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, "It says I'm still alive." Taza smiled. "Then you are hearing right." The fire cracked softly. Outside, snowflakes fell like quiet prayers. Inside, Clara felt her world shift in a way she hadn't thought possible. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. His skin was warm, rough beneath her fingertips. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to live again. Afraid to want anything after losing so much." He caught her hand, holding it against his face. "You are brave, Clara Whitmore. You walked into the desert with nothing and found your spirit again. That is not fear, that is strength." Their eyes met, and in that stillness time seemed to slow. There were no years between them, no past or future, only the heartbeat of two souls who had both known loss and chosen somehow to live. He leaned forward, slow and reverent, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment they simply breathed together. No promises, no declarations, just understanding. When she finally drew back, tears glistened in her eyes. "You saved me," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, you saved me." The following days brought sunlight, melting snow, and the first signs of spring. Taza could ride again, though he still tired easily. They rebuilt the corral, patched the roof, and gathered the scattered horses that had wandered during the storm. At night, when they sat by the fire, Clara sometimes caught him studying her quietly, not with desire but with a kind of awe, as though she were something sacred. One morning she awoke to find him outside, standing at the edge of the canyon, the rising sun painting him in gold. He turned as she approached. "I have been thinking," he said. "When the snow is gone, I will ride to the town. Make peace with the sheriff, trade again." She frowned. "After what he did?" His gaze was calm. Hatred eats a man's spirit. I will not feed it. She admired that about him, the quiet strength that came not from pride, but from restraint. As the day warmed, she found herself humming an old hymn, one she hadn't sung since she was young. When he heard it, Taza smiled. Your voice carries peace, he said. She laughed softly. It's cracked and weary. Like the land, he replied. But the land still gives life. And in that simple exchange, she realized what had changed in her. She no longer felt old. The years were still written on her face, yes, but inside she felt young, alive in the way only those who've survived storms can feel. That night, as the fire burned low, Taza took her hand once more. Clara, he said, when I said at the auction that I wanted you, I did not mean for work. Her heart stilled. I meant that I saw your spirit. It called to mine. I didn't know why then, but I do now. She met his gaze, her breath trembling. And what do you know now? That life gave me another chance, he said simply. To love without fear, to walk beside someone who knows what pain costs, and still chooses hope. Her eyes filled with tears. Then I suppose we're both fools, she whispered. He smiled faintly. No, we are both alive. Outside the snow melted beneath the first breath of spring, and inside that small cabin on the mesa, two souls found warmth enough to outlast the coldest winter. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it came like a flood. The snows vanished from the mesas almost overnight, replaced by carpets of wildflowers and the hum of bees. Rivers swollen with meltwater carved new paths through the canyons, and for the first time in months the wind carried the scent of life instead of dust and cold. Clara Whitmore stood outside the cabin, her face turned toward the sun. The warmth felt like a benediction. She closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the land, the soft shuffle of horses, the cry of hawks above, and the rhythmic sound of Taza sharpening his knife by the corral. He was strong again now. His shoulders, once gaunt, were full and solid. The long scar on his side had faded to a pale line, a reminder of both pain and endurance. He moved with purpose, quiet but sure, and sometimes she caught herself watching him with a tenderness that still startled her. In the months they'd spent together, they had built something beyond survival. It wasn't just affection, it was understanding built on silence, loss, and small acts of care. And yet Clara knew that life was not finished testing them, because the town, with its whispers and its watchful eyes, had not forgotten either of them. When Taza first mentioned returning for the spring auction, Clara thought he was jesting, but he was not. The auction started our story, he said one evening by the fire. Let it end there too, or begin again if the spirits will it. Clara had laughed softly, half in disbelief. You think the good people of Dry Creek are ready to see us again? The savage and the 60-year-old widow? Taza's lips curved slightly. Let them see. Maybe their eyes will open. She shook her head, though she couldn't help but admire his calm. You think like a man with nothing left to lose. He looked at her then, steady and unblinking. No, he said. I think like a man who has found everything worth keeping. She said nothing after that, because deep down she knew he was right. The morning of the auction dawned bright and golden. Clara dressed in her cleanest calico dress, the same one she'd worn the first time she saw him. It was patched and faded now, but she tied her hair neatly and dusted her boots. When she looked in the small cracked mirror, she saw not the weary widow who had once trembled before a crowd, but a woman with fire still in her heart. Taza, meanwhile, wore his traditional Apache attire, soft buckskin shirt, turquoise beads, and a single eagle feather in his dark hair. The people of Dry Creek would stare, she knew that, but he would not hide who he was. As they saddled the horses, Clara hesitated.
Taza, what if they mock us?
He glanced at her, then at the horizon. Let them. Their words are wind. We are mountains. And so they rode. Dry Creek looked almost unchanged. The same dusty main street, the same weathered saloon sign creaking in the wind. But as they rode in, every conversation seemed to stop. People froze where they stood. The blacksmith's hammer fell silent. Women on porches paused mid-sweep, eyes wide. Whispers spread fast. It's him. The Apache. And her, Clara Whitmore, I'll be damned. Thought she'd gone off to die somewhere. Clara kept her chin high, though her pulse thundered in her chest. Taza rode beside her, calm and unflinching, his gaze fixed forward. They stopped near the auction block, the same weathered platform where it had all begun, the same spot where he had spoken those shocking words months ago. I want the 60-year-old woman. The auctioneer, a stout man with a florid face, nearly dropped his ledger when he saw them. "Ma'am, sir," he stammered. "We weren't expectant. We came to sell a horse," Taza interrupted, his voice deep but measured. The auctioneer blinked. "A horse?" Taza nodded to the black stallion behind him, proud and strong. "He runs free now, but he's ready to carry another." The auctioneer swallowed, then turned to the crowd. "Well, folks, we got ourselves a fine Apache-bred stallion here. Strong as an ox, fast as thunder, who'll start the bid?" For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Then, from the back of the crowd, a familiar voice broke through. "I'll bid 50. Clara turned and saw Sheriff Tom Avery standing there, hat in hand. His face was older than she remembered, and guilt sat heavy in his eyes. He stepped forward slowly, voice steady. "That horse saved my men in the blizzard 2 months back. Apache here pulled one of them out of the river with his own hands. I reckon he's earned his piece." The crowd shifted, murmuring. The tension softened just a little. 55, called another voice. 60, shouted a third. Soon the bidding rose, modest but honest, and when the final price was called, Taza handed the reins to the buyer with quiet dignity. No one dared mock him. No one dared mock them. When it was done, Clara turned to leave, but Taza did not move. Instead, he stepped back onto the platform. The crowd fell silent again. He looked out over them, his dark eyes unwavering. "When I came here last," he said, "you called me savage. You laughed because I spoke for a woman you thought was too old, too broken. But I have seen more strength in her heart than in all your hands combined." A ripple moved through the crowd. Clara's throat tightened. He went on. "The land does not ask your age before it feeds you. The fire does not care about your skin before it warms you. So why should love be any different?" For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind stirring the dust. Then slowly, hesitantly, someone began to clap. Another joined. And another. Until the sound filled the street, raw and human. Clara felt tears blur her vision. She looked up at him, her Apache, standing tall before a crowd that once despised him. He turned to her then, stepping down from the platform. "We end what began here," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "But not end. Begin again." He took her hand right there in front of everyone. No one dared protest. The sheriff even tipped his hat as they walked toward their horses. They left Dry Creek as the sun began to set, the sky painted in gold and rose. Behind them lay whispers and history. Ahead, open plains, rivers, and the promise of peace. They rode side by side, silent but content. After a while, Clara spoke. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Taza smiled faintly. "Maybe not today. Maybe not ever. But their children will. And their children's children." She looked at him, her heart full. "And what of us?" He turned to her, eyes soft. "We ride until the spirits call us home. And when they do, I will find you again, in this life or the next." The wind caught her hair as she smiled, feeling younger than she had in decades. The land stretched wide and endless before them. A promise, a prayer, a home. That night they made camp beneath the stars. The fire burned low, the horses grazing nearby. Clara lay beside him, her head resting against his shoulder, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. "You know," she murmured, "I used to think my life ended years ago, when my husband died, when my body grew old, when the world stopped seeing me." He turned his head, meeting her gaze in the flickering firelight. "And now," she said softly, "I see that it only began the moment you said those words. I want the 60-year-old woman." Taza smiled, his hand finding hers. "And I will keep wanting her, always." The stars wheeled slowly above them, silent witnesses to a love born not of youth or beauty, but of courage and grace. In the wild heart of the frontier, under that vast and eternal sky, Clara Whitmore and Taza's story became legend, the tale of a woman reborn, and an Apache whose heart defied the world to claim her. And the wind carried their laughter across the mesas long after the fire had gone out.